They say comedy is just jokes, but what happens when the jokes land like punches and the targets hit back harder? Dave Chappelle, one of the most fearless voices in comedy, has made a career out of crossing lines. But behind the laughter is a hidden world of tension, resentment, and rivalries the public was never meant to see until now. Some comedians have called him out with no filter. Others have revealed a side of Chappelle that never made it to the big screens. One comedian was a rising star he once championed. Another was a comedy icon who thought they were untouchable until Chappelle held the mic. Who are the names he never forgot, and why did some of them leave a mark he never laughed off? You'd be shocked to find out what goes on in the comedy world. The rise of Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle's rise to fame wasn't the result of overnight success. It was built on raw talent, relentless persistence, and a unique voice that stood out from the very beginning. Born on August 24, 1973 in Washington, D.C., Chappelle grew up in a household surrounded by intellect and education. His mother, Yvonne Sion, was a university professor, and his father, William Chappelle, was a professor and music scholar. But despite that academic environment, Dave showed early signs that his path would be different. He was drawn to comedy from a young age, and by the time he was just 14, he was already performing stand-up comedy at local clubs around the D.C. area. This early start gave him time to shape his style and experiment in front of live audiences. At a time when most kids his age were focused on school sports or hobbies, Chappelle was on stage late into the night, learning how to work a room. He later attended the Duke Ellington School of the Arts in D.C., where he studied theater. That training added another layer to his comedic timing, making him not just funny, but a sharp performer who understood how to embody different characters and deliver lines with impact. The combination of street-level comedy experience and formal acting training helped shape the uniquely expressive performer the world would come to know. In 1992, Chappelle got his first real break on HBO's Def Comedy Jam. At just 19 years old, he delivered a bold, fearless set that stood out for its honesty, sharp wit, and lack of pretension. Unlike many comedians who were focused on one-liners or recycled premises, Chappelle brought a rawness to the stage. He talked about real life, social issues, and personal stories, all while keeping it funny. That performance immediately caught the attention of the comedy world and marked him as someone to watch out for. His film debut came shortly after, in 1993, when he appeared in Mel Brooks' Robin Hood Men in Tights. While it wasn't a massive role, it introduced him to a wider audience and gave him his first taste of Hollywood. Over the next few years, he made several appearances in films and on television. But things got even better when he co-wrote and starred in the cult comedy Half-Baked, a stoner movie that would become a fan favorite. Although the film wasn't a massive box office hit at the time, it grew a loyal following and helped cement Chappelle's reputation for writing smart, edgy material with wide appeal. But the real turning point in Chappelle's career came with the launch of his show, which premiered on Comedy Central in 2003. The sketch comedy series was unlike anything else on television. With sketches like Charlie Murphy's True Hollywood Stories, featuring the now legendary Rick James skit, Clayton Bigsby, a blind black-white supremacist, and countless others, Chappelle delivered a level of satire that was both fearless and brutally honest. The show wasn't just funny, it held up a mirror to American culture, race relations, celebrity, and politics in a way that few shows ever had. The series quickly became a cultural phenomenon, and Chappelle became a household name. It ran for only 2 full seasons, with a few unaired episodes released after he walked away from the show in 2005, a decision that stunned fans and the industry alike. But even with that short run, Chappelle's show made an enormous impact and is still cited today as one of the greatest comedy shows of all time. In the years that followed, Chappelle returned to the stage gradually, performing unannounced stand-up sets and staying largely out of the public eye. But when he came back officially, he came back strong. Between 2017 and 2021, he released several Netflix specials that earned him multiple Grammy Awards. His return was marked by a more mature, sometimes controversial voice, but one that still held the attention of audiences worldwide. In 2019, he received the prestigious Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, the highest honor in American comedy, awarded by the Kennedy Center. It was a full-circle moment that recognized not only his career accomplishments, but also his influence on the art form itself. But while Chappelle's rise has been marked by success and accolades, it hasn't been without conflict. The same boldness that made him a star has also led to controversy. And not everyone in the comedy world has agreed with his approach. Chappelle's controversies and challenges. While Dave Chappelle's rise to fame has been marked by creativity and acclaim, it has also been defined by turbulence, some of it sparked by others, and much of it created by his own refusal to conform to industry standards. Few comedians have walked such a fine line between admiration and outrage, between being labeled a genius and being called out for crossing boundaries. And at several points in his career, Chappelle has made decisions that not only surprised his fans, but reshaped the industry entirely. One of the most defining moments of Chappelle's career came in 2005, at the height of Chappelle's show's success. At the time, Comedy Central had offered him a $50 million contract to continue the show for 2 more seasons, a deal that would have made him one of the highest-paid comedians on television. But instead of signing on, Chappelle walked away and disappeared to South Africa with little explanation, leaving behind a stunned audience and a studio scrambling to complete the season without him. Later, Chappelle revealed that the decision wasn't about the money, it was about control. He had started to feel that the sketches, which were intended to critique race and culture, were being misinterpreted by the very audiences they were meant to challenge. In his own words, he said the laughter he heard didn't always feel right. Some people, he felt, were laughing at the characters, not with the message. That uneasy feeling grew into a deep discomfort, and he began to suspect that the show was being exploited for profit at the cost of its original purpose. Rather than allow his voice to be diluted or misunderstood, he made the rare and costly decision to leave on his own terms. That moment became legendary. It cemented Chappelle's reputation as someone who wasn't afraid to walk away from fame when it no longer aligned with his values. But it also created a long period of silence and mystery around him, one that would last nearly a decade before he returned to the spotlight. When he did come back, starting with a series of sold-out stand-up performances, and eventually a multi-special deal with Netflix, the world had changed, and so had the tone of his material. Chappelle was older, more serious, and more willing to provoke. But with that evolution came new challenges and intense backlash. The most heated of these came after the release of Sticks and Stones and The Closer, 2 Netflix specials where Chappelle tackled subjects like cancel culture, identity politics, and the queer community, especially transgender issues. While many praised the specials for their unfiltered honesty and sharp social commentary, others saw them as dangerous and hurtful. In fact, queer community organizations publicly criticized Chappelle, accusing him of punching down on marginalized communities. Although Chappelle defended his right to creative freedom, insisting that his material was rooted in truth and intended to open dialogue, not harm, the controversy didn't die down. It lingered and became part of a larger cultural debate. Beyond the stage, Chappelle also found himself at the center of other high-profile disputes. In 2022, he made headlines in his hometown of Yellow Springs, Ohio, where he had long been regarded as a beloved local figure and community investor. When a proposal was introduced to build affordable housing in the village, including units near a development where Chappelle owned property. He vocally opposed the plan and even threatened to pull millions of dollars in investments, including a planned comedy club and restaurant. Critics accused him of blocking efforts to address housing equity in the area, while supporters argued he had legitimate concerns about how the project was being handled. Regardless of where one stood, the incident showed that Chappelle's influence extended well beyond comedy, and that his positions often sparked real-world consequences. Then, in 2023, during a live show in Boston, Chappelle once again found himself at the center of political controversy. While discussing the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict, he reportedly described Israel's actions as war crimes. Audience reactions were divided. Some attendees cheered, while some others walked out. The moment triggered media coverage and widespread online discussion. Supporters argued that Chappelle was speaking truth to power, while critics claimed he was oversimplifying a deeply complex issue. Once again, he had delivered an opinion that couldn't be ignored, and, just as often, couldn't be agreed upon. Whether it was the comedy world, local politics, or global events, Chappelle has never stayed silent, even when silence might have been easier. He challenges norms, pokes at cultural sensitivities, and refuses to retreat from public debate. But in doing so, he's also made enemies and attracted harsh critics. Some of those critics have been activists, media outlets, and community organizations, but others, they've come from within the comedy world itself. Fellow comedians, some once considered friends or allies, have called him out, fired back at his routines, or openly questioned his approach to comedy. And as you're about to see, not all of those exchanges have been friendly. Katt Williams. Katt Williams has never been the type to hold back, not on stage and definitely not off it. Known for his electric delivery, wild charisma, and sharp commentary, Williams carved out a space in comedy by being completely unfiltered. Over the years, he's become a staple of black stand-up, starring in hits like Pimp Chronicles and American Hustle, and commanding a loyal fan base that respects his refusal to conform to industry politics. But that same defiant streak has also led to more than a few feuds, and in recent years, one of the most surprising targets in his crosshairs has been Dave Chappelle. The tension began simmering publicly after Katt Williams' now infamous appearance on Club Shay Shay with Shannon Sharpe in early 2024. During that long-form interview, Williams took aim at a number of comedians, but many were shocked when he turned his focus on Chappelle. Williams accused Chappelle of crossing him, a strong statement, especially considering the fact that the two had never previously been known to have direct issues. According to Williams, the moment of betrayal came when Chappelle publicly defended Kevin Hart and Tiffany Haddish, two comedians Katt has repeatedly accused of being pushed by Hollywood at the expense of more talented black voices. Williams' point wasn't just about loyalty, it was about what he viewed as Chappelle taking the side of the establishment over a fellow independent artist. In Williams' words, "Chappelle would never cross me, and then he did." The disappointment in that statement made it clear that this wasn't just professional, it felt personal. Chappelle, known for rarely responding directly to criticism, didn't let this one slide. At one of his shows, shortly after the Club Shay Shay interview aired, he addressed the situation head-on. Without naming names, he referenced comedians who get mad on podcasts but never show love in real life. He went further, saying, "Katt is one of the best painters in the game, so why are you drawing ugly pictures of us?" The underlying issue seemed to go deeper than a single moment. Williams has long expressed frustration with the comedy world on who gets elevated, who gets left out, and who plays the game. Chappelle, while often critical of the system himself, has still been awarded by it with multi-million-dollar deals, top-tier recognition, and institutional praise. To Katt, that may have looked like compromise, but to Chappelle, the criticism looked like misplaced bitterness. Despite the heated words, Neither side has escalated the feud further, at least publicly. But the divide remains visible, and fans have taken notice. What was once mutual respect between two outspoken, genre-defining comedians has become a cold distance, shaped by clashing values, hurt pride, and a shifting landscape in stand-up. But not all of Chappelle's critics came from the same generation. Some came from younger voices with different priorities and completely different ideas about what comedy should be. Jerrod Carmichael. Jerrod Carmichael represents a new wave of comedy that's introspective, socially aware, and deeply personal. His work isn't just about punchlines, it's about vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to challenge old norms. Known for his HBO specials and acclaimed series The Carmichael Show, he's built a reputation as one of the most thoughtful and experimental voices in stand-up today. But when it comes to Dave Chappelle, Carmichael hasn't held back, and what he said has sparked a divide between two generations of comedians. The tension between Chappelle and Carmichael became visible after Chappelle's release of The Closer in 2021. While many comedians either stayed silent or offered vague commentary, Carmichael took a firm stance. In multiple interviews, he criticized Chappelle for what he described as an unhealthy obsession with transgender topics, suggesting that the older comic had let his ego get in the way of progress. In an interview, Carmichael bluntly said he's an egomaniac, adding that Chappelle's legacy was becoming more associated with transphobia and homophobia than with his earlier brilliance. That comment cut deep, not just because of the words, but because of where it came from. Carmichael is openly gay, and his comedy often tackles topics like identity, masculinity, and generational trauma. For him, Chappelle's style of comedy, especially in recent years, felt like it was punching down on communities that didn't deserve it. He wasn't just offering critique. He was questioning whether Chappelle's voice was still helpful or harmful in today's climate. What made matters more intense were the rumors that Chappelle allegedly demanded a public apology from Carmichael behind the scenes. While no official statements confirmed it, several outlets cited unnamed sources claiming that Chappelle was deeply angered by Carmichael's comments and considered them a betrayal, especially coming from a younger black comedian he believed should have reached out privately rather than through the press. Ideologically, the clash couldn't be more clear. Chappelle sees himself as a truth-teller, someone unafraid to challenge the mainstream, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Carmichael, on the other hand, sees comedy as a space that should evolve with the culture, not push against it at the expense of already marginalized groups. In many ways, it's less a personal feud and more a reflection of two completely different visions of what stand-up should be. Their silence since the public fallout speaks volumes. There's no reconciliation in sight, and no sign either is willing to budge on their position. Whether their paths will ever cross again, or whether they'd even want them to, is unclear. And while Jerrod challenged Chappelle with ideals, this next name brought something entirely different. Raw fire, industry secrets, and an unpredictable war of words. Hannah Gadsby. Hannah Gadsby's name might not come up in traditional stand-up circles, but her impact on the global comedy conversation is undeniable. The Australian comedian broke into international recognition with Nanette, a Netflix special that blended comedy, trauma, and critique of the comedy format itself. It challenged the role of punchlines and exposed the emotional labor behind performance. For some, it was revolutionary. For others, including Dave Chappelle, it represented everything he believed was wrong with where comedy was headed. In 2021, after The Closer drew backlash from the queer communities and allies, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos defended the special and mentioned Gadsby's name while justifying the platform's commitment to diverse voices. Gadsby didn't take kindly to being included in that defense. In a public Instagram post, she called out Netflix and Sarandos for platforming what she considered harmful content, saying, "You didn't pay me nearly enough to deal with the real-world consequences of the hate speech you refuse to acknowledge." Shortly after, Chappelle posted a video on his own Instagram addressing the growing criticism around his special. In it, he issued a challenge to his critics, stating that he would be willing to meet with queer representatives, but with certain conditions. One of those, delivered with his signature edge, was this: "You must admit that Hannah Gadsby is not funny." The comment sent a clear message. Chappelle wasn't just brushing off the criticism. He was directly undermining the comedic credibility of someone who had spoken out against him. The jab didn't receive a public reply from Gadsby. Still, it sparked debates across social media and comedy circles. Some viewed Chappelle's comment as an unnecessary personal attack, especially given that Gadsby's style of comedy was fundamentally different, more narrative and less punchline-driven. Others saw it as Chappelle defending his turf against what he believed was a wave of overly sensitive, unfunny discourse disguised as comedy. Their feud reflects a much larger cultural divide. It's about what comedy should do. Should it challenge discomfort, or should it avoid inflicting harm? And who gets to decide what's funny? While Gadsby's criticism centered on platforming and responsibility, this next voice brought decades of experience and deep disappointment in Chappelle's recent direction. Margaret Cho. Margaret Cho has spent her entire career pushing boundaries. As one of the first openly bisexual Asian American comedians in mainstream entertainment, she's long spoken out about identity, race, gender roles, and personal struggle, often with a fearless, biting humor that made her a trailblazer. But when it came to Dave Chappelle's more recent material, particularly his repeated commentary on trans issues, Cho didn't hold back, and her words cut deep. In interviews following the release of The Closer, Cho called Chappelle's jokes painful and destructive. She expressed disappointment, not just as a member of the queer community, but as someone who admired Chappelle's skill as a performer. In her view, someone with that much talent and influence shouldn't be using it to target marginalized groups. Cho acknowledged the nuance in Chappelle's comedy, but questioned the intent behind it. She didn't accuse him of outright hate, but she suggested that the tone and direction of his jokes felt like a betrayal, not only of vulnerable communities, but of the kind of comedian she once thought he was. Her words carried weight because, like Chappelle, Cho isn't an outsider to criticism. She's weathered her own storms, often for speaking truths people weren't ready to hear. But this time, she was on the other side of the spotlight. The interaction between the two didn't escalate beyond interviews, but the tension was unmistakable. Cho wasn't trying to cancel Chappelle. She was asking for better. And when someone of her stature makes that request publicly, it tends to resonate. But this next voice in the growing list of critics wasn't from a legendary veteran. It came from someone who, like many others, had watched Chappelle's evolution with growing discomfort and finally spoke out. Michelle Buteau. Michelle Buteau's comedy is known for being bold, joyful, and unfiltered, often drawing from her Caribbean heritage, motherhood, and experiences as a woman of color in America. She's part of a growing wave of comedians who blend personal storytelling with social commentary. And when it came to Dave Chappelle's stand-up, she didn't mince words. In panels and interviews following the release of The Closer, Buteau was direct in her criticism. "Dave, it's not funny, it's dangerous. I can't believe somebody would make millions and millions of dollars for making people feel unsafe. That is so wild to me. What I'm saying is, it can be done. We can tell jokes and stories, and not disparage a whole community." Her statement wasn't about canceling Chappelle, but rather about drawing a line between comedy that challenges and comedy that reinforce harmful stereotypes. For Buteau, the stakes were real. She spoke about the rise in violence against trans individuals and how public figures shape the tone of public discourse. Buteau's comments echoed what many in the comedy community had been thinking but hadn't voiced. She wasn't trying to start a feud, but in a cultural moment where silence could be seen as complicity, she chose to speak out, calmly but firmly. And that's what made her comments stick. She didn't attack Chappelle's legacy or question his talent. Instead, she questioned his priorities. In a comedy world still figuring out how to balance freedom of expression with social accountability, voices like Buteau's carried a different kind of power that wasn't about volume but about clarity. But while some critics challenged Chappelle for his material, others clashed with him over power, recognition, and long-standing personal resentment. One in particular had been waiting years to speak: Ellen DeGeneres. While Ellen DeGeneres and Dave Chappelle have never openly feuded, there's been a subtle but persistent tension between them that lives in jokes, references, and carefully chosen words. For years, Chappelle has used quiet jabs and sideways remarks to challenge the carefully curated image Ellen maintained throughout her career, especially during her reign as daytime television's so-called Queen of Nice. Ellen, who rose to fame in the 90s as a groundbreaking comedian and later became one of the most recognizable daytime hosts in television history, was widely embraced for her charm, kindness, and her "just be nice" mantra. But behind the scenes, that public image came under fire, particularly after a series of reports in 2020 alleged a toxic workplace environment on The Ellen DeGeneres Show. Former employees and guests claimed they experienced bullying, favoritism, and cold treatment. Ellen eventually addressed the controversy, apologized publicly, and ended her show after 19 seasons, but the damage to her reputation lingered. Dave Chappelle, known for cutting through public personas, didn't directly call Ellen out during this time, but his commentary grew noticeably pointed. In his stand-up routines and off-the-cuff remarks, he took subtle aim at celebrities who built their careers on carefully crafted identities, especially those that seemed performative. In one instance, he spoke about how niceness in Hollywood often masks deeper dysfunction. And to some fans, this felt like a dig at the kind of public image Ellen had represented for decades. The connection between Chappelle's commentary and Ellen's fall from grace became even clearer when Margaret Cho entered the conversation. Cho, who had already criticized Chappelle for his jokes about trans people, revealed in interviews that her own experiences with Ellen were difficult. She spoke about being treated dismissively behind the scenes and described Ellen as someone who was not nearly as warm or supportive as her public image suggested. That revelation added fuel to the perception that Ellen's reputation had been built on branding, not authenticity. In Chappelle's world, honesty, even brutal honesty, is sacred, and Ellen's brand of polished corporate safe humor simply doesn't line up with his worldview. The tension between them may never escalate into a full confrontation, and maybe it never needs to. But in comedy circles, these small digs and unspoken criticisms matter. They shape how peers see each other and how history remembers them. But while Ellen represented a carefully polished image, this next comedian came from the opposite end of the spectrum: Dane Cook. Dane Cook's rise in the early 2000s was meteoric. With his fast-talking, high-energy performances and massive appeal to college audiences, he packed out arenas, a rare feat for any comedian at the time. But with that success came backlash, and over time, Cook's style was criticized for being more style than substance. While he was beloved by a huge segment of fans, he never earned much praise from other comedians, especially those known for more socially conscious, introspective work like Chappelle. Over the years, Chappelle has made subtle remarks about mainstream comedians who rely on volume, movement, or charisma instead of meaningful content. The contrast between the two comics couldn't be more stark. Chappelle's material dives deep into race, politics, and cultural tension, Cook's comedy, in contrast, is centered around observational humor, personal stories, and exaggerated physicality. Their careers also unfolded differently. Chappelle walked away from the spotlight at his peak, gaining respect for protecting his integrity. Cook, on the other hand, chased the spotlight, sometimes to his own detriment. And while Cook had massive popularity in the early 2000s, Chappelle's work has stood the test of time in a way Cook's never quite has. At one point, a rumor circulated that Chappelle and Cook had a feud after Chappelle stormed off mid-set during Dane Cook's show and emptied the room after him. However, Cook later denied the rumors as false and exaggerated. But no matter the level of fame or the style of comedy, every name on this list has one thing in common. At some point, they may have crossed a line Dave Chappelle wasn't willing to ignore. Which other comedian do you think Dave Chappelle has had issues with? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.